psyched to be here to talk with you about this stuff because I've been really kind of singularly focused on sustainable design ever since I was a design student. So I went into industrial design in 1997, and I was absolutely focused on working in green design, which meant that I had no work, right? It also meant that I ended up really kind of chasing any kinds of projects that I could find out there that were relevant, that really kind of spoke to my desire to get rid of the amount of stuff, the amount of waste that I saw around me. I'm Canadian, I kind of come from that long tradition of people who carry canoes through woods and spend a lot of time thinking about that, about the environment. And you know, when I looked at product design, the systems that were associated with product design and looking at how to really kind of rein in the impacts that we had were not things that I really had control over, especially as a sort of a brand new design student. So I ended up working with some green builders down in Texas and working in furniture, and then I ended up back up in Canada working with an artist up there. I always loved this one statement by Martin Amis. It's the longest amount of text I will grace you with, but he was an artist when he saw society. It never crossed his mind that society had to be like this, had any right, had any business being like this. A car in the street. Why? Why cars? This is what an artist has to be. Harassed to the point of insanity or stupefaction by first principles. We need to sort of question things and in order to change things, and that's what most of us are doing in all these disciplines in sustainable design right now. Now I am going to focus a little bit more today, talking to you just about landscape and architecture and other things I've been involved in, and less on products. But this is true in everything. Everything that we've got breaks down. We're constantly remaking everything that surrounds us, right? And every change that we make is an opportunity to improve on the last thing that there was. Permeable pavement is just an example of replacing a certain kind of pavement with a new kind that looks the same but has a completely different function, has a completely different impact on stormwater and on the environment. And this is true for furniture, when we look at the objects that we buy in our houses, when we look at the infrastructure and the lighting structures, everything, all of our utilities, with the materials that we use, we have to remake really everything. This actually is a wonderful project. This is an old furnace factory in Germany that got transformed completely, totally bioremediated from the ground up to create this landscape park. It's beautiful. The tools that we use really inform and change everything that we make. Many of you are designers or design students, and you know, especially if you're flying across North America and you look down at the countryside, you can see all the grids, right? And you know what kind of tools and what kinds of mental models people are using when they cut up that landscape a particular way. Infrastructure looks the way it does because people are thinking, oftentimes, really kind of in a two-dimensional plane. And so when we really kind of increase the capacity of our tools to really visualize things, to analyze things, and to simulate things, all of a sudden you have a really different, you start seeing really different outcomes. Right now, I'm actually right now working with Autodesk. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with them. Primarily, people know them because they make AutoCAD, right? Everything in the global economy and the built environment, right, passes through the hands or the pixels of designers or engineers or design professionals of some sort around the world, right? Everything does. Everything is made with intention in some way. And 9 million of those people use Autodesk products, which I found actually really fascinating. So in fact, they're not just making AutoCAD, but they are making things for industrial designers and for media and for visualizing how, not only how buildings go together, but also working with other companies to figure out how to do energy modeling on buildings. And when we look at product design or industrial design, a lot of how we make changes to what we make comes from having access to certain kinds of information, really understanding the whole life cycle of a product, really getting information about where things come from and where they're going. And the challenge in a lot of that stuff is that we don't frequently have those tools. And quite frankly, most of the people who are making really significant design decisions about what gets made in the world are not making beautiful and sophisticated things. Okay, they're just making roads, and they're doing it the way they've always done it. So, I mean, when I went into looking at, chasing down different crazy kinds of jobs all around the world, all around America, working for architects and so forth, I was really looking for leverage, right? Like, how do you actually influence things? How do you actually have an impact as a designer? Because once something leaves your hands, a lot of the time you actually are not able to control how it gets implemented. So the story that I'm actually going to talk to you a little bit about is one where it was actually kind of one of the most challenging kinds of working contexts that I have worked in, and I bring it up just because it looks at two kinds of tools, right? If we're going to be reductionist about it. The one kind of tool we could talk about are the kinds of tools that you're learning in design school, which is like your brain, like really understanding how to work in a community or work with clients. And the other side, it has to do with actually sort of digital tools and what you can do with those. This is Windsor, Ontario. Windsor is it's actually downwind from Detroit. So all those stacks that you see in the background are all the manufacturing going on in Detroit, Michigan, mostly for the auto industry. They border traffic at Detroit, Windsor. Going across the Ambassador Bridge is 10,000 trucks a day. 40% of all US-Canada trade goes across this bridge. The outcome of that basically is that you've got a system which is uniquely positioned to preserve the diesel truck ecosystem and not much else. The trucks are backed up such in this community that you've got serious environmental health issues. You've got trucks backed up miles from the border waiting to go through, and they're basically idling as they move through the community. And there's people's houses and schools and that sort of thing on both sides. The artist that I work with in Canada does sort of large-scale, kind of like really enormous public art. And the reason I went to work with him was because he was doing things where he was incorporating sort of scientific processes. He was actually incorporating bioremediation, so technologies using plants to clean water inside structures. And he was doing that by creating sort of soil matrices made out of recycled plastic. So it was actually really kind of incredibly innovative design work that he was doing and incorporating it into an art context. So he was actually brought to Windsor by the Canadian Auto Workers Union, who brought him in and said, you know, we really need somebody to help us out here with what is going on, and also with kind of the future of their work. Because auto workers, more than anyone else, realize that the industry is kind of falling away, and what's going to happen to all that manufacturing. And so they brought a group of us in there to really kind of work on how to transform this area, basically 2 kilometers of road in the middle of Windsor, Ontario, in an area that's basically bisected by this wall of trucks. And the way that we went about this, because we actually had no authority, I mean, nobody actually hired us to come and do anything. And the way we did that was we built some really, really basic models, okay? So some of the images I'm going to show you here are not sexy, okay? This is not done with really, really high-end stuff. This is, we set up a course at the University of Windsor, a really small university right there on the border in the School of Visual Arts, and we said, okay, you know, build a table with, got a GIS map, okay, so a map of the region, spread it out on a long table, and said, okay, we're going to come up with ideas for how to transform this region, get people thinking about sustainability. This is a place where nobody knows what that means. That's true for most places, right? And so in doing so, we came up with all sorts of wild ideas, and the main point there was that we actually had no authority to do that, and so that meant we could do anything. And then we had an opening, and we brought in a whole bunch of community members, and they came in, including politicians. And the politicians came and they said, fantastic, this is really great. We really, really need you to do this thing, and we're building a pedestrian bridge, and awesome, and you're on the team. Which was not really good news to the engineers, by the way. They were really like, people coming from the big city, causing trouble. But what was really interesting in learning about this was that, in fact, it was the first time that anyone had kind of created a vision for where the city could go. Now, this is where the engineers wanted to build. And this is sort of where it gets interesting, because I think that there's a lot of power in the tools that they were using, right? There's this incredible power in what they're making. But this is a default. This is what you do when you're using a tool, but you're not actually designing with the tool, right? And so, once again, I mean, the tools influence what we make, but how we go through an actual design process with them is something different. It was really interesting learning the fact that most of the infrastructure in the world gets built sort of with basic criteria. Well, this is a bridge, it stands up, it's got ramps, Ontario Building Code, sign off, okay, let's build it, let's go. And we kind of said, no, can we like have a big landmass sort of going across like trees and wind turbines and stuff? And they were like, I don't know about that. But we, what was really interesting, I mean, when I'm showing these CAD models, when I first went into these meetings, we didn't have drawings. There was no process. I was like a 25-year-old industrial designer. I had, on one side of the table, a bunch of angry engineers and 2 artists that didn't draw. Very, very well, much respect to the artists, very, very accomplished, but that's just not what they did. And so I had to kind of come up with things. And so I worked with a really incredibly skilled 3D modeler. We went back and forth, bringing these things in as provocations to the engineers until they finally, we kind of refined them and worked with their criteria. Yes, okay, we will put a cage over the top, I promise. Only if we can turn it into a lattice work with plants. And until finally we actually built something that looked kind of like what we were intending to build. Now, the win there is not the fact that this is the most beautiful thing. This is actually right after construction, so all the plants are looking kind of like, like they're sad, they're trying really hard. They're new. So it's looking much better now. But what this allowed us to do was get a crack into a system, right? This allowed us in. By being able to show all these images, we were able to actually get the community on our side, and then we were able to build what we wanted to build, right? Without that, you end up with a bunch of very, very opaque things that engineers would present, but the community can't understand because they can't read sort of 2D CAD drawings. It's not how they perceive space. And it means that a lot of stuff gets built that is not really in their interest, right? So I think, this whole process really got me to thinking a lot about how we actually get stuff done, right? How we actually work in the trenches, so to speak. And how we're able to actually make impacts. Because the thing is that humans actually make stuff all the time. Humans love making stuff. They just build and build and build, and we're going to keep doing that. And I was actually reminded recently, did any of you watch Fraggle Rock, or am I, yeah? Do you remember the Doozers? Okay, so the Doozers, for those of you who weren't like children in the 80s, were this race of small creatures that did nothing but build stuff. That was it. They were just like extremely prolific, and they had no waste because the Fraggles ate everything that they built, right? And so they would make things in different flavors, so that the Fraggles would come and eat it. And one of the things that they said was that architecture is supposed to be enjoyed, and I often sort of come back to that because what I'm really interested in exploring and working on and seeing all of you work on is how do we create a system that's as simple as that with our desire to change and to innovate and to build? How do we make sure that on the back end we've got a system that will eat what we make, right? And the ways of doing that and the tools for doing that are really complex. I'm not actually going to go deep into those. But I thought I'd leave you with that one. And you can say hi to me anytime you like. That's my email address. Thank you so much.